who've asked. There we go. Welcome again, everyone, to Gabbing About Gardening. My name is Lucretia Shanfarber. Gabbing About Gardening is a free, by donation, based on the gift economy, bringing you timely and valuable garden information. And today we have Gordon MacKay, who is an expert pruner, going to talk to us and present to us the best ways to prune our fruit trees during summer. We have 59 people. Oh, no, there's 61. So more people coming all the time. We'll give everybody a chance to get settled in. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. It's so lovely to see so many of you. Gordon, can you wave to us so everybody sees that G means Gordon? Perfect. Gordon MacKay, I first saw Gordon's presentation at the Quadra Island Garden Club. And ever since that time, Gordon, I knew that I wanted to hear more of what you had to say. You present information in such a lovely, concise, interesting manner. And so when I started gabbing about gardening, which was early in January, I put you on the list, and we've been talking about doing this seminar for a while. So thank you so much for doing this, Gordon.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just a reminder that Gabbing About Gardening is based on the gift economy. The gift economy is a principle that was introduced by Charles Eisenstein. And it's based on the fact that we're all in this together. Let's share information freely. We have so much expertise around the world, and especially locally here on the islands and Vancouver Island. So if you find value in what you receive today, you are invited and encouraged to contribute. Gabbing About Gardening provides an honorarium for all of our guest teachers. And whatever you share with Gabbing About Gardening, at least half of it will be shared with our guest expert. Today is Gordon MacKay. Gordon, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in pruning. I mean, you've really become the name in pruning in British Columbia. Tell us a little about your background and what you love about pruning.
Well, I started working in the landscape horticulture business back in the early 80s, and I was doing suburban gardening. So some of the gardens had some maturity to them, so there was a lot of pruning involved with that side of things. And then I attended a 2-year program in Scotland in horticulture, which was 35 hours a week in the garden itself, and then 8 or 10 hours in the classroom. So that was sort of the groundwork for the pruning side of things, and that just sort of developed from there over the years through practice and reading and sort of researching, and yeah. So now I'm sort of pruning out of Cowichan Bay area, so I'm doing southern Vancouver Island, and then part of that is the teaching with the workshops, and also through VIU Nanaimo and the Horticulture Centre for the Pacific down in Victoria. So I do some of the pruning classes down there with the students. Yeah, so happy to be here. Yeah.
We are so happy to have you. We have not been together for over a month, Gordon. And there are 72 now gardening souls on this Gabbing About Gardening gathering for gardeners. So thank you so much for being our expert guest teacher today, Gordon. I've already turned the co-host function over to you. Are you ready to rock and roll, my dear?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, let's go. Thank you again, everyone, for being with us. This is Gabbing About Gardening, presenting our guest teacher and expert, Gordon MacKay, speaking to us on summer pruning.
Hi there. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. What we're going to focus on is strictly the fruit tree pruning today. So that will include, for the purposes of summer, we're going to be looking at all the stone fruits, the nectarines, peaches, etc., and apples and pears, and plums, and then we'll talk a little bit about a little bit of science behind that as well. But we won't get too deeply into that part of it, just enough of it to make sense for everybody. And there's quite a big group here, so Lou's going to manage some of the questions on the chat window, and then we'll probably do a lot of questions afterwards, sounds like. So yeah, let's just see. Just going to minimize this part for a second. Okay, so this is something for the olden days now. So if you were doing arboriculture previous to maybe even the 1980s, actually, then you would be doing this, and we'll talk about this a little bit, the flush cuts. You would have been painting the winds with some sort of usually asphalt type paints, and then there'd also be, you'll sometimes see older customs done with concrete and bricks, filling those larger crevices on the mature trees. So these are all things of the past now. We don't practice these things anymore with horticulture. There's a couple of exceptions which we'll talk about as we go along. So at college, we did have some ladders. We were doing some pretty scary stuff, but yeah, that's sort of back in the day. So, you know, things like cleaning out wounds in trees, that was thought to be a really beneficial practice, but it's actually what's happened now is they realized that you're actually decreasing the lifespan of that tree by taking out all that rotten burial wood that was actually protecting the live wood. So this is no longer recommended. So what does it mean by a flush cut? Like a flush cut, we don't mean flush like to the ground. We're talking more like flush cuts on the side of the tree. So generally we want to leave a small stub, if you like, on this, if you're doing any side branch pruning on fruit trees. And this is the sort of thing that used to be done on these big crevices. They would fill in with bricks or concrete. So in this case, they removed a lot of those bricks, and they found out that this whole area had decay all along the side of the tree. Painting, this is done more, this fella here was doing it more for sun protection, but with the larger wounds, I've actually found that you can use some soil if you like. If it's a larger wound, anything sort of larger than a couple of inches. For smaller wounds, I wouldn't even just leave it as it is. I find the soil tends to help with that sealing process. So this is an example of when you do your side pruning, what we call a reduction cut. Leaving this long stub tends to be a point of decay. Too close, flush cut, and you'll end up getting decay happening below that cut along here. So usually you want to leave the collar and the ridge. So it's a collar right here. That's the ridge. So that's your first little tip for fruit tree pruning or any pruning, is how vital those cuts are. So here it's pretty minimal, but they probably could have went slightly further back on this cut. But so as you can see here, this branch is dead. We're going to go beyond that live growth. This one's still alive. We're going to leave that ridge and we're going to leave that collar and we're going to cut at a slight angle this way. In this case, on a bigger branch, you can go underneath, first of all, in your first cut. Second cut can be above, and then that branch will just fall safely, and then you can make the final cut along here. Now that's what they call target pruning, is the term for that. If you don't do that 3-cut system, often the branch will just fall by itself. You do 1 cut, and you'll often get damage to the actual bark and stem. So that's why we do the 3-cut system. So as I was mentioning before, about the 1980s, 1970s, after that, Alex Shigo on the left here, he did a lot of research on trees, especially making cuts vertically on old trees to see exactly what was happening with the decay process and how much the pruning practices were affecting the health of the tree. And so what he found out was, one of the things he found out was that this flush cutting was affecting the health of the tree. So now we have this thing which Alex was one of the original developers of. It's called Codits. This is a system where the tree itself is defending itself from decay spreading. And it's basically it's a little compartment system. There's 4 walls, and that's basically what it is. A defense process is what it is. So it stands for compartmentalization of decay in trees. That's what it stands for. So you can see there's the first zone, the first wall is immediately below the cut that you made, so you can't see it there. The second one is behind that cut, and the third one is either side of it, and the fourth wall, which is the strongest wall, is on top of the cut. So here is just a very, very old wound that was made, and it sealed itself. So there's 4 different walls we work with in arboriculture. You can see here, that's the cut, that's wall number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 is the final wall. So that's going to actually seal that whole wound there. So you can see an example here, the old wound. And here's an example on a maple tree. That's these wood, that's decay has completely been walled off, so it hasn't spread down or hasn't spread in. So cuts themselves, we talk about sealing. It doesn't really heal, it seals. So for fruit trees, we're going to go with roughly 45 degrees above the bud. This important at this point here is not below this bud. So here it's too sharp. That can be a problem with decay in here. This is a little bit too low again. And this one, there's too much stub on there. It's too high. So why do we talk about this with fruit trees? So there's 2 different main types of tree. Some of them will make the compartments quite well. Others will not. Unfortunately, apple trees and pear trees, they don't form these compartments that well. That's why you have to really be careful with your cuts, making them like this, because they will not make these compartments well, and you'll definitely get decay happening here, and often that decay will spread down into the stem. And that's why we really are pretty sticky on the cuts that we make. We're going to make good cuts. So why do we prune? Things like removing dead growth, rubbing branches. You might have 2 stems going up too close together. Fruit production, we're going to talk about that in a second. This is a main one for fruit trees. Why we prune fruit trees is to increase production. Young trees, we'll touch on a little bit. we're just talking about crown raising, which means you're just basically making more access at the base of the tree. That's all that means. We don't practice any of this stuff with fruit trees. This is all to do with like candle pruning with conifers, pollarding, something to do with more of a street tree, urban trees. Stilling is more of a thing to do with willows and hazelnut trees where you cut them back in the spring. That's just a separate category for pruning. We do the cordon and bleaching though, and espaliering, which we'll talk about in a second. So summer pruning, we start summer pruning in July, and because of the season, it's going to go right till September in this area. So mid-July to end of September for the fruit tree pruning. So if you've got a really healthy tree, you're going to prune the new growth back by at least half. If it's super strong growing, you can go as much as 2/3 just on this year's growth only. So the crux of this whole talk is basically this one line here. So again, you're going to tip the current year's growth by half. You might want to do some limb stuff if you think there's some crossing stuff. Obviously, you might have to sacrifice some fruit on there, but if it's dead, diseased, or dying, you definitely have to take out the dying stuff at this time of year. But the reason we talk about the larger limbs is because the sealing process happens a lot faster in the warmer conditions. The weather conditions are better compared to winter, especially with things like cherry trees. So cherry and plum trees, nectarines, peaches, pears, peaches. We're only going to prune those guys in the summer now. We no longer prune cherry trees in winter time. Winter pruning is strictly done with apples and pears only. A wine glass just means the center is more open to get more airflow and light. Be careful right now, lots of fruits on the tree, so be conscious of that. Walking around trees right now, you can go off and get fruit falling off. With peaches and nectarines, you're only going to be tipping that new growth, not a heavy prune, because that tree's going to set itself up for next year for fruiting. We call these Epicormics. These are just basically water shoots in the crown of the tree. So you want to basically go not much more than 30% of the tree when you do your pruning, not including the suckering part. That can be done separately, but the actual crown of the tree, when you're finished, you shouldn't really take off more than 30%. So here is too much. I'm not going to include too many bad pruning. This isn't one of my projects, by the way, just so you know. I'm not going to include too many bad pruning photographs because there's lots of those on the internet, etc. So, but what's going to happen here now is we're going to get a massive flush of epicormic growth, which within a fruit tree isn't really going to produce fruit for quite a while. And if it's in this area here, the new growth isn't really going to be that strongly attached. So you often get problems with breaking and tear outs, etc. on the crown of the tree. So that's an example of what not to do with fruit trees. So here's your pruners. You've got them set up. You've done your sterilizing with alcohol. If there's fruit down here, you leave it. This is strictly a leaf vegetative growth, just leaves on this. There's no fruit buds here. So in this case, we're putting back from a half to 2/3, leaving a leaf bud and leaving the bud right above the bud. That's the cut we're going to make. In the summertime, if you have a lot of growth coming out the main stem, then it's ideal to cut those now because you're not going to get any regrowth until next year. So you can go ahead and take those off your apples and pears. That's not a problem at all. It's often the first thing you'll actually do. And that will allow more airflow to come in and more light in the crown of the tree. So here's what we're trying to do here. This is 1 year old vegetative buds. All these buds are programmed to produce leaves. A little microchip in there. 2 year old sections, you're going to get little flower buds coming off the side. You'll notice in the wintertime, they're very small and stubby, quite closely attached. that's your flower bud. Here is just leaves. So by cutting this back by half, you're removing that hormone which is released at the tip. And what will happen now is it'll branch out and in a little while, might take 2 or 3 years, but from this cut, you're going to get fruiting spurs. Sometimes the word is flower buds, fruiting buds, but they're interchangeable. Some of the Master Gardener programs, they like you to say flower buds instead of fruiting buds. Okay, winter time, here's just going to be a leaf bud in the winter, and that's a fruiting spur or flowering spur. You can see here it's been spur pruned. So in this little bud, there's a flower right there. So that's the potential apple right there. Okay, so sometimes you get shoots coming from the top, coming from below, and coming from the side. Generally speaking, because of the light exposure, you'll get better fruiting off of this sort of thing and not as much off of the top. Keep in mind though, the more you take off the top, the more the plant's going to grow, especially in the winter months. So be really careful to follow that 30% rule, because if you go into too deep pruning, too heavy, you're going to get lots of regrowth on you. And that's not really what you want. You want lots of fruit, but less growth. Sometimes we get different requests. Some clients ask for mushroom trees. I'm totally sure what that meant, but I thought, well, you mean something like this maybe? Like, is that this? Maybe you've seen this online maybe? But we figured out maybe it would be something like this. That's what they're looking for. The reason I put this in, because we're not really going to go for shape when it comes to fruit trees. We're going more for production. So even though that might look nice and neat and tidy, that's not really the goal here with these trees. It's not a formal pruning situation. So keep in mind when people use this word, I got to shape my trees. Not really sure what they mean when they say that. I'm not sure if they know what they mean either sometimes. Things like stepovers for a very small garden. That's a tree that's been budded or grafted on a short stem at 12 to 16 inches high. And you can just espalier this, train this along with a wire. That's called a stepover. There's lots of systems here. Belgian fence, cordon, candelabra. These are all systems of training trees, particularly apples, pears, and peaches. For this area, the most popular one for a peach would be something like a fan, or this bottom left one is very popular for peaches in my area. That's a Belgian fence style for apples, and a more mature one on that guy. So for cherry pruning, you can actually do a system of training which is called UFO, upright fruiting offshoots. That's basically, you're going to take one young tree and you're going to bend it along a wire, and then all the shoots going up are going to be all where your cherries are. You can keep this first wire about 3 feet high, and then all these shoots are going to be between 4 and 7 feet tall. And these are what you're working with for cherries. In this area, we do a lot of this, and it keeps the plant small, and it means you can then put a cloth or a mesh over the top of it to protect it from the birds. So this is a system out of Washington State, and it's called the UFO method of training cherry trees. Let's just see what I got here. Okay, if you're doing this, this includes pruning, but for young trees, if you're looking to do a small area, what we do a lot of is we're taking inspiration ideas from the commercial world. So a tall spindle tree is a young tree that's trained below horizontal with either string or wire or twine. And that then reduces the growth on this side branch. And it also means you get way more fruit production. And it's a system of training apple trees. It's called tall spindle. So in this case, this is a commercial operation that's the trees are between 3 and 4 feet apart, and they're about 10 feet high. And these are pruned once or twice a year. But the pruning is way less and way easier because it's a smaller area. You haven't got to use big ladders, etc. So the tall spindle training system is a useful one for apples and pears as well. You could do it with pears too. We're talking about flush cuts before. You can't really see that well, but this is what I call a bevel cut. So every so often with this system of training, if you've got an older side branch that's not producing as much, we make an angled cut quite close to the stem. And from that cut, you'll get a brand new branch coming on the side. So it's called a bevel cut. And this is done if you're using trees that are reaching that point where you have to reduce some of those older, thicker branches and replace them with young ones. So within about 2 or 3 years, you'll have a producing branch coming off of here. And that's what we call a scaffold. So that's a scaffold there. There's a young one here that came last year from that cut. That's a scaffold. These trees generally have between 5 and 8 scaffolds off of the main branch. So that's what you're looking for when you're buying a young tree in the fall. You're looking for at least that many scaffolds or side branches. So what I was going to say with this was that it's really knowing about where to begin, basically, and also at what point are we going to stop this pruning, because the biggest mistake I think with fruit tree pruning is over pruning the plant. So I would just suggest that if you're starting out, to do it in stages, and don't think of it as a one-stop sort of prune, because you're going to be pruning this month into September, and then the next phase will be January, February for your apples and pears. So you have a nice window there in the winter time to do that pruning. So that was an overview. I have a feeling there'll be quite a few questions here. I just wanted to cover some of the basics of the cuts you're going to make. Let's see here. Okay. Now I'm going to get back into the main. Are you still there, Lou? Let's just see if I can get back into.
Yes, I'm here, Gordon. I just forgot to unmute. This is so fascinating, learning these core techniques. It's really amazing. Let me know at what point you're ready to hear some comments from people. I think.
Yeah, we can do that right now, actually.
Oh, would you like to? Okay, let me read you some out of the chat, if that's okay.
Yeah.
They're going to be a little bit random, but here is someone. This is Hadis Levy asking if there's time for talking about espalier apple trees, I'd be grateful. For example, what is the best material to train new branches and the best time to do that?
Okay, so there's a couple of options there. When you buy the espalier, you're going to either buy it as a tree that's been grafted to have 2 or 3 varieties, or you can buy a regular tree and then train it yourself. In the espalier side of things, usually if you're training it by yourself, you're going to go with a 90-degree angle coming off the main stem, and you could just use any rubberized a wire with a rubberized outer core. You can use a really soft twine. Lee Valley have a product that's more of a foam twine. As long as it's not a really heavy duty, synthetic twine that's going to last too long, because it might end up getting into the branch. So, but yeah, you can use raffia for that. That's what the fellow was using on the picture there in the commercial orchard, using a kind of raffia. It's very soft. Yeah, so, and the espalier pruning, you might find actually that you're pruning your tree 2 or 3 times a year. So you might be doing it in April, some in June, and again in August, because there's a different system. You're keeping it a lot shorter. So instead of going in once a year in August, you might have to go in, especially if it's an older tree, you'll have to go in 2 or 3 times a year. Yeah.
That's great. Does that include figs as well, Gordon?
Well, I know that you can do figs, you can train them, but most people around here just have freestanding figs. And they're generally, after 20 years, they're about 15 feet high. And then they just manage them that way. But if you do want to manage figs in a more compact system, then you can go on to YouTube and look at Bob Duncan. He's from Victoria, and he has fig pruning for the West Coast. He's got a system if you want to maintain the fig to be about 8 to 10 feet high. He has a system on, you can watch him do that system. Okay,
good advice. Thank you. Nance is asking if you might explain the difference between healthy and new fruit trees. How much to prune in the first year, or whether to flick off the blossoms, or what to do with young trees. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what happens is the larger, sometimes the fruit can actually end up breaking the branch if it's a very young tree. So most people tend to just, when the fruit is, a marble size, will just thin it off that way. And then it's the same system though. Like if you've got a young tree has 12 inches of growth, you can prune it so you can take off 6 inches. In fact, in some ways, the young trees, it's more important to actually prune and train, because that's when you're gonna you're kind of like training it for life, if you like. So I think the young trees is actually more important because you've got an opportunity to actually train that tree to be something that's workable, as opposed to moving to a place that has very, very old trees and somebody may have done some very strange pruning indeed, which is often the case.
I think we've all had that experience. So a young tree, how old is a young tree, Gordon?
Well, when you purchase it, they're usually 3 years old, so between 3 and 4. That's what we call young trees. So, and then you've got the training is going to happen as soon as you buy it. Basically, as soon as you buy it, you're going to start training it, and you may find that, for example, on a pear tree, you might find really sharp, steep angles on the side branches. you can use like a little spacer or a little weight to bring that side branch down. And that's connected to that slide that I showed you where he had branches that were below horizontal, the tall spindle. That's connected to that system. So the older systems, they talk about like 60% of an angle. That makes sense. So between the side branch and the main stem. Obviously, that's just an approximate angle, but if it's too steep, then you often get a weak point, and it can be a problem down the line. So those strings that he had on that slide, they're only on for 3-4 months, and then the tree is solid. There's no need to keep them on there. It's almost like bonsai, you know. You can take them off after the one season.
Great, thank you for that, Nance. I hope that answered your question. Gordon, Tina is asking you, should I be pruning Italian plum tree that is covered with not ripe fruit, as with your recommendations for apples and pears?
Oh yeah. So actually, it's funny you say that. It's a good question, because I find that plum trees don't need as much pruning. They can naturally grow quite dense. It's a kind of different system. They're very prone to overgrowing or flushing out too much if you prune too hard. So actual fact, all you're really doing with a plum right now is maybe some tipping, and that's all. They can grow in a way that's a lot more dense. Apples and pears need more light to get good fruit. So in her case, just some light tipping, and just watch out for, there's a disease called black knot that's quite bad on plums, and you'll see the main branches still have like almost like a black growth on them. It's quite bad in this area, so watch out for that. And yeah, it's pretty minimal though, pretty minimal. Maybe anything that's majorly crossing or rubbing. Yeah, but if you do that pruning, you have to do it this month or next, because winter pruning you can't do plums. It's not good for the tree.
Oh, tell us more about that. I didn't know that.
Oh, the plums and cherries, it's just that sealing process that we talked about. It tends to let in a lot of pathogens, and you end up with just a lot of problems with where you're making the wounds, especially the bigger wounds, bigger cuts.
So do not prune plum and cherry trees in winter. So that's only a summer pruning?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the thing to keep in mind is you may have a dwarf tree and you might think to yourself, I've got to prune it, but you have to decide why are you pruning it? What's your reason behind pruning it? Is it because you think that you want to get more fruiting spurs? Is it something crossing? Just really think about that process before you tackle it, because sometimes it may not need to be pruned that much as you think it needs to be pruned. Maybe 5 minutes, might be 2 hours, but that's something that comes with practice. But that's one thing I've learned with clients is that they often want pruning, but they haven't really thought it through why they want the plant pruned. Not just fruit trees, but plants in general.
So if you ask yourself this question, why am I pruning this tree? Do you ask that every time you're ready to take a cut? Like, do you actually have a process, or should we be developing that process where before we take any cut, we should ask, do I want this to produce more? Do I want to take out a crossing piece? Is that sort of the way to approach every cut?
It's more really before you start the project, you're thinking to yourself what your end goal is. So you've got a goal in mind. So in the case of fruit apple trees, it's usually my goal is to produce more fruit, healthier fruit, and quite often it is to reduce growth. And so the crux of summer pruning is growth reduction and producing more spurs. That's the two main things to think about. In the case of a dwarf tree or a mini dwarf, which is even smaller, you probably aren't too concerned about the growth getting too much, but you are concerned about maintaining and producing spurs. So what does a spur thing mean? It basically just means a flower is going to be on that spur, and it may or may not produce an apple, but it's programmed to. But you can be the best pruner on Quad Island, but if you haven't got the pollination, then you won't get any fruit. So there's that to think about too. You know, mason bees and honeybees can help with that, but all we can really do is try our best and to prune with a goal.
Well, I'm going to admit that I am a terrified pruner. You definitely helped me. You were on the radio show Gabbing About Gardening. I think it was 2 weeks ago, right? And I felt a little more confident. But no, I'm just so afraid I'm going to screw up so badly that I can't recover from it. Is that possible, or do you find that usually a tree will come back even if you make a bad mistake?
Usually it's pretty forgiving, because if you the tree will usually tell you if you prune too much, for example, then the result will be you'll get a lot of regrowth. And so then you've got to decide how to what we call reframe that new growth into fruiting growth as opposed to just leaf buds. And that's how I mentioned that in the slide, where you have that piece of new growth that's coming out, and by doing a reduction prune or a tip prune, the plan is the idea is that there'll be a side branch from there, which will be a flowering spur. So you can certainly reframe the tree. So it'll usually let you know by doing that. That makes sense. It's a bit tricky to explain sometimes.
It does make sense.
It's just.
I know. Well, we're going to have you take a tour doing pruning workshops. But yeah, that does clarify it a bit. It makes me feel a little less concerned. Gordon, we have a question from Susan. She's saying, is there a maximum amount to take off in summer pruning? I think you may have mentioned this already.
Yeah, usually we don't want to take off more than 1/3 of the crown. 30% is the magic number. It's tricky, but keep it, as I say, when I said before about, you don't have to do it all in one visit. That's important too, because you can go back in the winter and do another prune. So if you've just moved to a place or you have really old trees, then I would suggest doing it in stages. It's a lot better for the tree. I'm not trying to make more money from this by saying to a client, I'm going to come back. It's just for the tree. It's for the sake of the tree. Because if I spend 3-4 hours and just prune, and then in the summer, I just think that you'll end up getting a lot more regrowth the following year, and that's not required or not what we want with fruit trees. I know it sounds kind of productive because people often want growth on their plants, but with fruit trees, you don't really want that. You want fruit production. Otherwise, I wouldn't even bother having a fruit tree. I don't think I would. They're attractive trees, but they're really there for production and health. Yeah. Hopefully that makes sense.
Well, good answer. I guess it's kind of like getting a haircut in a way. If you get your hair trimmed on a regular basis, it's probably better than getting a brush cut every 5 years or something like that. Here's another question. A question about the bevel cut that you showed us. is there a branch that we leave, or will the branch grow in during the next 2 to 3 years?
Okay, so that's a very specialized cut. So on trees that are, let's just say, younger than 12 or 15 years, what they do is with the tall spindle, they'll have a branch, a side branch that's quite old and it's not producing as much. Instead of like working that branch to death, if you like, by chip pruning it and getting more flower buds, they actually do that bevel cut, right? And you leave it about an inch or two out from the stem. And from that cut, you get a brand new branch, a young branch. And that's the key thing. That young branch is quite vigorous. It will grow quite a lot in 1 year. And that's going to have the new fruiting spurs on it. Because remember, fruiting spurs, they don't always stick around forever, you know. So that's why that system is done, because they want to produce a brand new branch. And in the case of this tall spindle, they're only really taking off maybe 2 or 3 scaffolds every couple of years with that bevel cut. So you're not doing the whole tree like that. Yeah, that's important to mention. You're not going to take every single scaffold off the one tree. I mean, that would be hellish, you know. You'd get a really major reaction. You're only going to take off 2 or 3 at one time, and it's more in keeping with this tall spindle. You could do with an espalier, I guess, but yeah, it's an interesting system, and that's done with apples and pears, just apples and pears. Yeah, just make that clear.
Okay, good. Just apples and pears for that kind of cut. Evelyn and John are saying that they're curious about the term summer pruning of fruit trees, since all they've read about suggests late fall and winter are ideal times for doing this. So yeah, the summer pruning thing it seems like it's just been coming to light in the last few years.
I think originally it might be twofold. The first reasoning behind it was that when you prune right now, the tree doesn't have much time to react, so it isn't going to grow anymore. So you can see a bit of a pattern here, right? You can see me saying this again, you know, you don't really want too much growth. The second thing is, when you do your cuts on the bigger branches, you're going to get way better success with that sealing process. I can't really underestimate the value of this sealing process. We keep talking about it as pruners, as arborists, but it's such a vital part of pruning. Is we want that tree to seal up as fast and as strong as possible. So that happens way faster in the summer. And then so growth reduction coupled with spur production, and then the sealing up of the wounds. January, February time, hard pruning is going to get you into a cycle of lots and lots of growth, because the tree's just gearing up for growth. Yeah, so that I think that's really where it came from originally. And also, I find when you do your summer pruning, when you've got fruit on the tree, as long as it's not too hot, I'm always concerned about this heat dome. So this might be something that's going to change now with climate change. For example, I'm not going to be pruning this week that much because when we had the heat dome effect, I saw some heat damage on some of the fruit, apples and pears. The flesh was not looking good. So, but in a regular year, you actually have more light come into the tree, and you'll find your quality of fruit will increase because you've taken away those branches, and you got more energy into the fruit as well. It's a good question, though.
So Gordon, it is a great question. Are you suggesting then that we wait until things cool down? Because here on the West Coast, at least Vancouver Island, Gulf Islands, I think we're in for more heat wave, as I understand it. Should we wait?
Yeah, I think we've got sort of with my area, it's where I stay, it's going to be, you know, sort of 5 or 6 days of 30, 31, and then we're going back down again. So I'll just take a little bit of a pause and then get back into it again. But that's not really normal for me. I usually just keep going. I've never seen a problem. This is the first year I've seen that heat problem. If you haven't got any fruits on your tree, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's just I'm just talking about people who are really concerned about their quality of the fruit. Yeah. For example, if we're going to do juicing,
Okay.
or yeah, it's again depending on.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
You were going to say depending on something?
Oh, just sometimes depending on it, maybe your tree is not in the south facing situation and it's more sheltered. So if that's the case, then you can prune today. Just start pruning today. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Erin is asking or telling us that raccoons raided their young cherry tree and broke several large branches. Should these branches be pruned right back to the trunk?
It's something I'd have to really look at. If you feel that they're really badly damaged, then you'll have to, and then you could use that soil method. You know, with the soil I talked about, people might head off and do some Googling on that method, but might not find very much about it because it's not a secret. It's just that something some folks don't really know about or don't believe in. But as students, we always practiced it for bigger cuts, just a light layer of soil. And so for a cherry tree, you could use that system to try and seal it off. And I would do it like this month for sure. I wouldn't leave it too late. But I'd really have to see the tree itself to see how bad it was, and to see that how many of those branches are badly damaged. The second option is to take some off, and then the other ones that are damaged, just prune back to behind where the damage is, and then you can either prune them next year or you could reframe them, what I call reframing, which means you're going to get a new bud coming out that'll take over that branch. It's just what we call reframing the branch. Hopefully that helps.
Sounds really clear. Thank you. Hey, before I forget, Gordon, do you have videos or a YouTube channel or any visuals of you actually speaking and pruning trees?
There was one done many years ago. It's a winter pruning video on pear trees. It was pretty windy, so it was done by a media company that were just kind of starting out, so they wanted to get some exposure. So that's the only one I have. Yeah, but there's a lot of material. I have found that the slide I showed, I forget his last name, but Terence is in that slide with the tall spindle. So if anyone's interested in the tall spindle, I would suggest Googling up that system out of Cornell, and he is the sort of the wizard of that system. Basically, he goes around, you know, massive orchards, and he is the one that's behind a lot of the technology, what I call technology anyway, of the tall spindle system. So he trains a lot of those orchardists into that system of pruning. So you just look up tall spindle system Cornell. He's an amazing resource, and I've actually emailed him about some questions, and he's got back to me straight away, because we have quite a few orchards.
Sweet.
in this area now. And in Victoria, we have quite a few orchards that I work with on the young trees to train them up to be something for production of cider, etc. So it's quite a developing thing on this part of the island. I'm not sure what it's like up north where you are, but we have quite a few starting up. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that lead. So I will find this Terence from Cornell and his video, and I'll post it on the Gabbing About Gardening Facebook page.
Robert.
Again, everybody, you are tuned into our Zoom gathering for gardeners, presented by Gabbing About Gardening. We are based on the gift economy. Thank you to those of you who have already contributed. We really appreciate it. All of your contributions go to pay an honorarium to our guest teachers. They always receive at least half of what you contribute, and the rest of the money goes to fund educational programs, free educational programs that focus on gardening and permaculture around the world. We're associated with Morag Gamble, for instance, and the work that she's doing in Kenyan refugee settlements. We help to fund the work that she's doing there to help the refugees learn and perpetuate a permaculture garden. So thank you for your gifts, your donations. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Gordon. We still have lots of time left, but this is fascinating, timely stuff. We have another question. This is from Melanie Gordon. She's asking, on an espaliered apple, does pruning cause the suckers to grow? And can you just cut those suckers off?
Okay, so I guess sometimes I might seem like I'm into this terminology stuff, but that's more because I'm working with students, I guess, and they have to be kind of on the ball with this stuff. So when we talk about suckers, technically that's coming from the rootstock, so the base of the tree, because these trees are budded or grafted, and so suckers are coming from the base, so they have to always be taken off whenever you see them. You can leave them to the summer, or you can take them off the winter time, but if you leave those on, they're going to take over the whole tree. The epicormics are what we talk about in the crown of the tree, or above that bud line. And so if you prune too hard in the winter, then yes, you will get more of those produced. So that's why I said before that with espalier trees, you could be more gentle and do your first prune on, let's just say for argument's sake, May the 29th. The next prune could be June 15th. Then the final prune could be today, so 3 times. That's just an example. And so, because your espaliers, you really do want to take time to keep those side branches pretty short. Yeah, the biggest mistake people make is they let the fruiting spur get way too long, and it doesn't really. Sometimes you get damage because it's the branch might snap in the weight. So the whole point of espalier is to keep the side branches short. Yeah.
Thank you. Here is a question or comment from S.A. Jones. I have an ancient Granny Smith that has one massive fruitful branch, but the rest of it is pretty bare of fruit, or the fruit is super small. How can I encourage the other main branches to fruit more?
So without seeing it, I would say the parts that are not fruiting I would go out there this week and to prune this year's growth back by a half to 2/3. If it's not any longer than say 12 inches right now, then just go a half. If it's more than 12 inches long, then go to 2/3 to above a bud, like we had in the slide. And then those shoots that you've cut back will take, it won't be overnight, it'll take a couple of years, but they will produce fruiting spurs or flowering spurs, whichever one you want to use. And then that will be your new new apples on that side of it. But without seeing it, sometimes people leave too many. They have, especially espalier trees, they'll have the spacing is too tight, there's too many branches, too many side branches. If you space those out, you'll get way better fruit as well. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just curious to why it would.
Thank you.
I'm very curious to why it would do that. Very curious.
What are the possibilities?
Well, one possibility is that sometimes they did a family tree, which means they had 3 or 4 varieties on the one tree. And in that case, you might find that certain varieties do better than others. Some will flourish, some not as much. And that's the fatal flaw of the family tree, is sometimes you get some varieties do better than others. And yeah.
I love that term. I never heard that before, Gordon. Family tree. I mean, I have a cherry tree with four grafted cherries, but I've never heard it called the family tree. That's great. Okay, a question from Kim. I'm going to speed up a little bit because we've got lots of questions to get to. Kim is saying, I need to rejuvenate an older apple tree. Is summer a good time to start doing this? I want to lower it and open the center.
Yeah, this is a perfect time. Just be conscious that on older trees, when you talk about reducing height, crown reduction, those bigger cuts you make, they might come back and haunt you. And what I mean by that is that hard pruning may decline the lifespan of the tree. Also, the bigger cut you make, think of a tree as an energy system. It's like energy in that tree. So the bigger cuts you make, the energy in the trunk and the root system is going to produce a lot more growth. So be prepared for that. So if it's something you think is going to be workable, then maybe next year you'll have to reframe that new growth to make them into a proper branching system. But for trees that are way too big and reduce them down to something that's manageable, that's a tricky thing to work with, especially things like cherry trees. People often ask me if they've got a cherry tree that's 20 feet high and want to bring it into 10 feet high. And I don't do that kind of work. I just don't do that kind of work. Never have done. That's just not the way I would prune a tree. It's the wrong. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, but it's not the right tree to the right place. So rather leave it as it is, or you can't really work with that tree if it's going to be brought down that much. You're going to end up with lots of new regrowth, and it's not going to be a healthy tree in the future. So, but for her tree, might be some branches that you could see that are going up the way, and maybe there can be a way to reduce it that way over time. But I wouldn't do it all in the one go. Do some now and do some next summer. But I'd like to see that tree, a photograph of it.
Hey Kim, if you got a photo of that you can share, we can. Gordon can take a look. So I'm getting the sense here that you're the fruit tree whisperer, Gordon. You really have. You have this lovely rapport that I think is what we all need to develop to really, you talk about asking yourself, what does this tree need? And that's a lovely and important starting point. So thank you for bringing that forward. Shane is saying, I work in a garden with a mature plum tree with black knot on most of it. Would you recommend pruning it back 30% per year until it's under control, or cutting it down to the ground and hoping the new shoots are healthy? Or question mark, question mark, question mark.
Yeah, unfortunately, that tree is a situation is you go in there this week, you prune it back to beyond where the black knot is, so below the black knots. Then the branches are disposed of far away. You can't burn them right now. And then if the tree is, see, it might be a heritage tree. If it's some sort of heritage tree with, it has a value. Any tree's got a value, but some of the heritage trees have a bigger value. And so the problem being, you could cut it back to the base, but just keep in mind that if it's been budded or grafted, then the new tree that comes up will just be some sort of wild plum, which is fine, but just have that in mind. So if it's something like a Victoria plum or a Italian prune plum, the tree that happens to grow back might not be that tree. So for older trees, you have to say to yourself, you know, what is the value, sentimental value, heritage value of this tree? How do I go about removing this diseased part? So that tree, if he thinks that it's too much to sacrifice by taking all that black knot off, then the second phase is you could try the method of cutting it back to the main stem. But depending how low you go, if you go even lower down the stem, you might be removing the graft, and so the new tree will be more of a wild plum. But you'll know within a few years what the fruit production is like. Because unfortunately, you can't really use any chemicals on that.
Thank you. Oh, Yvonne. Hi, Yvonne. Thanks for joining us. I've just discovered, Yvonne says, about an hour ago. Well, why don't you tell Gordon what's going on, Yvonne?
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me okay.
Yep.
Okay, I was just checking my trees. I have a little orchard in the front. We've just put it in the last few years. And I was just checking my trees before this class, and one of my apple trees has completely fallen over and split at the trunk, like right at the base, about 5 inches from the ground, like completely snapped. Well, sorry, there's like, I'd say about 2 tenths hanging on. I can show you a picture. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it, yeah.
So it's completely snapped at the bottom, just I guess from the heavy rain. It's an apple tree, and is there any chance to save it by trimming off all the branches or lightening the load? I'm absolutely devastated, and I don't know what to do.
So I'm just wondering if there's a chance that it's snapped above the graft. You'll notice the graft because it will be kind of like a bulge when you go out there. If it's snapped above the graft, then there's a good chance that you'll get some regrowth, in which case it'll be the same trees you had before. If it broke below the graft, then you'll have a tree that's more of a wild apple that probably wouldn't be a dwarf tree, but it would be something a little different. So I'm just curious about where it broke exactly.
I don't know if this picture helps you see any better. I posted them on Gabbing. I don't know if you can see there. Yeah, I don't think you can see very well, but that's the tree. Yeah. It's only about it's 7 feet tall.
7 feet. Yeah, so I would just, I mean, I think if it was my tree, I would probably just cut it back and put soil in the wound, and then see what comes up next year from the base.
So you mean remove the whole top part?
Yeah, because it sounds
Like-
like it sounds like the top part is sort of like completely
It's
snapped.
severed.
So
Yeah.
yeah, you'll have to remove that and then put some soil in that cup, and then if there's a small chance that next year that you'll get some buds developing.
Can you sort of like graft it? Regraft the top part?
Yeah, you totally could.
So the top part of it, what do I do with that? Like I can, it's such a great producing, beautiful tree, and I'm just.
You could totally. I'm not sure you mentioned that, but it was a really good point that they made. If you look up something like a cleft graft or a bark graft online,
Okay.
you're going to do that system, then what to do then is just grab some branches, 1-year-old branches that are pencil thickness from the tree when you go out, when you finish this presentation. Or you can go out there, just skip out there and grab some branches and put them in the fridge. You can cut the leaves off if you want.
Okay.
And then you could use those as what they call a scion, like SCION.
Okay.
And then you could graft those onto that stump. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's lots of illustrations online about a cleft, for example, a cleft graft or a wedge graft. And you could, with a stem that size, you could probably do about 3 or 4 around that stem. Yeah.
Okay, I will definitely try that. And the top part is basically, there's nothing I can do with the top?
No, like I say, just take off some cuttings and then put them in the fridge until you're ready to.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for your advice. I appreciate it. And
Yeah.
Lori, thanks for your suggestion too. I'll go cry
Thank
now.
you, Yvonne.
No problem.
And Lori, oh, our hearts are with you. I feel like we're in a support group here for wayward children or something. It's really like that, right? You get to just love our plants so much. Lori is saying, I find if we don't prune the plum tree, then it will grow too tall. Do we prune plum trees after the plums have been harvested?
I mean, generally, the plums are done from mid-July to early September. So potentially, do you think they'll be ready? But you should be ready by probably the end of August. Do you think? I would think they'd be ready by. Much sure on the. I mean, you guys are maybe.
Yeah, plums are usually finished by the August long weekend.
Yeah, so you can totally do that. Yeah, you can totally, again, try and keep it in that sort of 30% range, but you can definitely harvest and prune after. That's not a problem at all. And with the plums, same thing. If you've got anything that's going to be over 1 inch or 2 diameter, then you can put some moist soil in that wound to let it seal better.
Okay, yeah, usually we've been pruning dramatically in the spring.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. The idea of pruning a little bit now and a little bit next year sort of thing instead of all at once.
Yeah,
That
and
makes sense because it's
Yeah.
the tree's trying to heal itself and it's putting all its energy into healing instead of producing.
yeah, that's right. And then as with any fruit tree, but especially plums and cherries, you want to use rubbing alcohol or some sort of bleach on your secateurs, because that just reduces any sort of bacterial transference. So for a big tree, I'll usually spray with rubbing alcohol every 10 or 15 minutes or something. And then if I'm going to change trees, doing a different tree, I'll spray between trees as well. On the secateurs.
Talk about loving trees is my plum, all my fruit trees are so old.
Oh
and
yeah,
they're starting to decay in the center, so we've tied them up to try to keep them alive
Yeah.
from splitting and
that's the way to go. That's all you can really do is
yeah,
bolster them up.
they're near their end and it's like, no.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank
Mm.
you.
Thank you for your question, Lori. And thank you for those great answers, Gordon. Another plum question. 'Tis the season from Tina. So for a plum tree loaded, branches are bending and currently being propped up. Will I harm the tree or take away its energy by tipping herbaceous branches and those vertical herbaceous ones that come off of the higher fruiting branches?
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with it. Herbaceous, I guess they mean the one year branch, 1 year stem. But yep,
Yeah,
well,
I
yep,
think so.
you can do that this week. You can go for it again. Just get their secateurs, razor sharp, sterilize them up, and if it's a tree that's older, you probably want to be sort of using a ladder situation. Sometimes the plum trees the limbs aren't as strong as you might like them to be. So for safety, you might want to use a ladder or a pole pruner. Yeah, but definitely, yeah, I'd recommend it.
Great. I just love all of the enabling that you're giving us, Gordon.
Yeah, no problem.
A cherry tree question. I have a cherry that has grown huge and I can't get to most of the fruit. I did a hard cut last year by 1/3 and it has sent out good new wood. I had planned to take out another main branch this winter, but your advice is to do that sort of work now. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. I would be doing that pruning right now. So for my area, this area here, I find that the cherries you're looking at between 30 to 50 years lifespan. So if you've got a cherry tree that's 50 years old plus, it's probably in decline. So it's not going to be as productive as a younger tree. But just keep that in mind. Unfortunately, cherries are prone to a lot more problems as opposed to, say, the Okanagan Valley, where it's a different kind of heat in the summer, a little bit of a harder winter. It's a bit more suitable for cherry growing. So yeah, but we can do it here, but it's just not quite the same.
Okay, thank you for that. A question from Marianne. I have an Italian prune plum tree that is 10 years old and has never produced a plum. What should I do?
So I guess one thing is people talk about the cross-pollination set of things. So you could purchase a different variety for pollination if you feel like that's part of it. So you would know by in the spring if you're seeing lots and lots of flowers, and the weather's been good, and then you're seeing pollinating insects, honeybees, native bees, all the things are all the boxes are ticked off, but you're not seeing any fruit, then it could be a pollination problem. It could be a variety problem, not the best variety. But in saying that, I would still go out there this afternoon and do some tipping on some of the new growth that's happened this year. Yeah. Trying to
Okay,
think. Yeah.
get out there, lady. Okay, from Susan, she says, so I have pruned my plum too much in winter and it's full of vertical suckers. What to do?
Yeah, so in that case, I would suggest the same thing then. You'll probably want to take some of those off. So a couple of options. You can either, if you wanted to keep some to be more production wood, then you could leave some. The ones you're going to leave, you could tip them by half. And then the ones that you didn't want to be production woods, take them right to the base of the stem. So removing them. So you've got two options there. You can either reframe it by selecting the really strong ones to be production, and removing at the same time, make it a balanced effect. So by thinning out those branches, you're removing some at the same time. If you take them all off, yeah, it's hard to really commit to saying to somebody, take every single one off without seeing the branch, seeing the tree, because I don't want to commit to that question. I'd like to see that tree first before I would make that decision.
Oh, you're not the first man who has not made a commitment. I can guarantee you that. Okay, from Tina, she's saying, so no tree coat or bonsai paste, do they cause harm or rather just no difference whether you use them or not?
Oh, well, the reason I put in the Alex Shigo, Alex Shigo was the researcher. Part of the compartmentalization research was that when he did his big cuts vertically thousands and thousands of times on different trees, he actually did find limbs that had been, they'd used sealant on the wounds, and there was more decay in those trees. So what he's saying is that you enclosed the process of the compartment was reduced. It just wasn't as efficient as it could have been because of the air. So there was less air, therefore the process of the compartmentalization was not as effective in the same way as having a band-aid on too long, and so the soil is, if it's a light layer, I find you've still got some airflow, but it's not sealing it off completely. So that's what he was going with his studies. So in other words, not recommended anymore.
That's so fascinating. How do you actually use the soil after pruning, Gordon?
Just basically go to the base of the tree, and if it's super dry, you may have to use some water, but just make a little bit of a light paste and then a very light layer on the wound, on anything that's kind of like maybe 1 or 2 inches. Anything that's smaller than 1 inch, I wouldn't. I just leave it. On saying that though, there is a couple of German researchers that are working on some paints that will be they'll have some sort of hormone in the paint, and that will allow some activity to seal up faster. But those haven't been released yet to any commercial applications. But that's sort of maybe the next field of interest, is because there are some urban trees that, for example, with vandalism or even just things like vehicles hitting them, there's in commercial applications, there's a need for something that maybe can seal up that tree faster, rather than removing that tree and then starting again. Because in that situation, the financial cost of the tree is pretty high, so they don't really want to necessarily take it out. So that's sort of the next generation of products might be coming down as some kind of almost like a rooting hormone type thing where you're actually trying to promote some sort of callus. Yeah, so there's two different kinds of growth. When you make that cut, the first reaction is called Callus Wood. And it's callusing is when you see the side of that wound closing slightly. And then the next, after 1 year, it starts making wound wood. Wound wood is very strong, and that's the wood that actually seals the cut. That's the strongest compartment. And that's wall number 4, and that's when you see a cut that's completely sealed off. And that's the strongest wall. But when you've used paints that aren't that great, you'll see the tree not producing that callus wood very easily because the paint gets in the way, you know.
That is so fascinating. I love that. So do you think it's the microbial activity in the soil as well that acts as like a natural antibiotic or antifungal?
That's the thinking behind it, yeah.
I love it. We're learning so much about soil. It's just, and you're the first person I've heard tell us about that. So thank you. That is so huge. From Mary Ann. Mary Ann is asking you, Gordon, does summer pruning apply to ornamentals as well as something like roses or anything you want to shape, even hedges?
Well, those ornamentals, that's a tricky one. It's a huge subject. So I guess what you could utilize the procedure by saying, well, if I prune my evergreen hedge in August, then that's it for the year. It's not going to grow anymore. So there's that argument to be made. Although in saying that, it seems like a lot of people prune deciduous hedges in the wintertime. Maybe it's because they can see the branches better or different reasons for it. So roses generally, for this area, it's a twofold system. The first pruning is in the fall, and then the final prune is in March, April on a lot of the bush roses, like hybrid trees. Yeah, so it's definitely a system that you could use for certain plants. If you want to do one prune a year, you could say, well, I'll prune in August time or July, and then the tree's going to stop growing. And also you're obviously going to get better sealing of the wounds. But things like California lilacs and those sort of things, the sealing process isn't quite as a big deal with those plants because they really seal up fast. You know, Portuguese laurels, Lelandii, cypress, they seem to seal up pretty fast. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We're coming up to 5 o'clock. I don't want to keep you beyond our agreed upon time. Are you okay to go just a few minutes beyond?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, lovely. We have a couple more questions I'd really like to get to. This is a question from Donald, who is, let me just line it up here, who says, we moved to a house with a large old apple tree, still bearing lots of lovely apples, but with a fair bit of canker on some branches. How best to manage this in the coming years?
Yeah, so that's a situation with, like I mentioned, make sure you're sterilizing. You could start to do more of almost like holistic type pruning, where you're actually, if there's a way that you could maybe remove some of that wood that's cankered, again, trying to keep in that 30% rule. And then in the winter time, end of November to end of Feb, there is a sulfur It can be used organically. It's sulfur mixed with horticultural oil, which is cottonseed oil. So the oil with the sulfur together, the sulfur part of it is a fungicide, so it helps a little bit with canker. And it's you could even do it like once in November and once in Feb. And then also maybe you could try even doing some making what I call little windows. So people are like, what do you mean by that? Well, it just means like thinning it out so that you've got more airflow. And again, that's going back to more like holistic pruning, where you're not really going to be using any harsh chemicals, but you're actually going to do it by pruning. But unfortunately, canker is a really tricky one. Once a tree has it, it's a really hard one to get back to major health. So if you think you can do some pruning on the cankered wood, but I realize it might be some of the main stem, in which case my advice won't work very well. But all those things I would suggest.
Thank you, Gordon. Nance is saying that she has an espalier peach tree that's doing fabulous and has lots of fruit. This is the first year for its fruit, and it's been in the ground for a year. It seems that the sunny side, she says, the sunny side of the fruit is turning peach colored, and the opposite, which is the house side, is yellow and hard. Is this normal growth or ripening? Do I need to wait to pick, or just pick half ripe and the rest will catch up in flavor and color? Not really a pruning question, but maybe something you know.
Well, I think I would just be inclined to try and to pick some and see if you can ripen them in a bowl, and then it sounds pretty normal though to me, with the sun hitting them on that angle. Yeah, that's good that you've got fruit. That's really good. That's excellent.
Wonderful. Congratulations, Nance. That's that's more than a lot of people can say. So Lori is saying, when do you prune grapevines? Right now, she's just pruning the extra long shoots with fruit. Do the grapes need to see the sun?
Well, we have a lot of, I'm sort of in the middle of some pretty huge commercial vineyards. So a lot of them will do a winter prune because they can really see what they're working with. And then one system is that if you've got a grape cluster, you could prune 2 buds beyond that. And then again, I've been nervous because of the heat dome. Although, yeah, I don't really have too much experience with grapes with climate change, but I have a feeling that they probably are going to be one of the crops that can handle it pretty well. So we probably end up seeing more grape growing, or hopefully there'll be more table grape growing instead of all the wine growing. But so the other thing that they're doing right now is they're removing, because grapes have huge leaves, so they actually are removing some of the leaves as well to get more light exposure into the cluster. So that's something you'll have to gauge yourself, but you can definitely do that system 2 buds beyond the cluster, and you'll find you'll get way better fruit production, like quality wise, you know. You won't increase your fruit production, but you'll increase the quality. And that's a vital thing, you know. Some books talk about, oh, pruning, you'll increase the production, but it's not always as easy as that. But yeah, you can definitely do that system with grapes.
Thank you, Gordon. So one last question before we say bye-bye and wrap it up. And I always like to have our guest teacher give us some parting words of wisdom. But before that, tell us, Gordon, what your favorite tools are. And that is a question from Tina. Thanks for that question, Tina.
Well, I mean, it's funny because the pruning, in some ways, I guess it's a good thing in some ways, because you haven't got a lot to choose from as far as the higher end stuff. So I've always found the Felco, just in terms of the blade strength and the fact you can buy spares for the secateurs. So in my case, over the years, I've learned to use the number 13, Felco 13, which has got a lot longer. It's got one of the handles is longer, so you can use two hands, and the blades are a bit bigger, so you can cut some pretty thick stuff with those. So when you're doing it all the time, like I am, it means that you're not having to always grab a saw all the time, because you can do a really thick cut with that secateur. And then you can get, I think it's called ISTOR, ISTOR. It's a sharpening tool that Felco actually brand as well, and it's for the blades. So I use that one. And then any of the saws, hand saws, I tend to focus on the Silky, like SILKY. I've used some Felco saws in the past, and they've just kept breaking on me, and then the blade would be stuck in the middle of a limb, you'd have a hell of a time getting it out. So the Silky, it's a Japanese product. The steel is a lot higher quality, and the newer ones you can get some pretty big hand saws for thicker stuff. The newer ones, you can sharpen the blade now. You can actually sharpen the blade instead of to buy a new blade all the time. So the Felco, the Silky saw, and then there's the Felco secateurs, pruning shears, if you like. And then I have the longer ones, which we call a loper, L-O-P-E-R, loper. They're Felco as well. But I don't really use those anymore, to be honest, because I'm up the ladder a lot, so I can reach pretty much most things. So I tend not to use the lopers anymore. So that's the main. Yeah, it's funny. There's not a whole lot of really. It's like a laptop bag that I keep my tools in. It's kind of nice in a way, this business. You don't have to have a whole whack of tools as long as you've got quality stuff. Oh, I guess I got the Silky pole saw, which is kind of a beast of a thing. You got to be careful with that thing. It's really sharp. So bigger limbs, you have to wear goggles because you're going to be doing it from the ground. That's strictly a pole saw. That just comes with the pole saw attached to it, and it's telescopic, so it goes up to, I think, 12 or 15 feet. And then the other one I have is Marvin. I think it's MARVIN. That's the pole pruner. So that's like a secateur, but it has a rope attached to it. It's fiberglass. It's out of the US, and those are really, really good quality. There's no sharpening involved. They're really, really powerful with a rope. You can attach another pole to it. So you've got a 6 or 8 foot pole. You're looking at a 16 feet piece of equipment right there from the ground. These are things you work from the ground. Because if you're working from a ladder with a pole pruner, because of the rope and the actual shaft of the pruner, you've nowhere to hold on to. So with the pole pruner and the pole saw, you're actually working from the ground level. That makes sense. So that's the main ones that and none of these companies are paying me to, unfortunately, to say this. But
well, yeah, they should be.
They should be, yeah. But,
well,
I
go ahead.
Yeah, just with the Felcos, because they're not that cheap, I would suggest trying to maybe try them out at the store, just if it fits your hand size, because the number 13s are quite big, and you might find them to be too big for your hand size. So just those Felco number 8s are good. The 6s are good. There's lots of different levels of Felco pruner, but you'll have them for life. If you don't lose them, you'll have them for life. You can buy new blades, you can buy new handles, you can sharpen the heck out of them. So if I'm working a typical day, I'll sharpen them maybe 15 minutes. It's got to be razor sharp. Like seriously, you've got to cut the hair off your hand. Basically, you've got any hair on your hand, which I have. You've got to, otherwise you're going to end up getting, major carpal tunnel. So razor sharp. You've got to really keep those things sharpened.
Wow, great advice. Thank you so much for answering that question. And thank you for, I think it was Tina who asked it. What a fabulous way to end this session. This has been remarkably helpful and informative, Gordon. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. It's fun.
It is fun. It's a lot of fun. Just a reminder, Gabbing About Gardening is based on the gift economy. Thank you so much to those of you who have already sent through e-transfers. We really appreciate it. We use it to further our educational programs and to pay and acknowledge with an honorarium all of our garden teachers. So thank you. Thank you for your contributions. So Gordon, from newbies to confident pruners, do you have some parting words for us that will encourage us to move forward and do our summer pruning?
Yeah, I think that the more you do the pruning and are doing it in a space that's peaceful, you're going to start to develop some instincts around it, and that instinct will guide you in terms of the cuts you make, the quality of the cuts, how much to take off, what branches to leave, and that's actually going to be a real good guide for when you're doing any kind of pruning, not just fruit trees, but and that will lead to just a whole sense of the whole aesthetics of the thing as well. It'll make a lot more sense when you make those cuts, and then if you're doing the same tree again the next year, you'll start to see the effects of those cuts. And so I would just really recommend to get out there and prune in that environment and just get used to those cuts and see if you can develop that instinct, because that instinct part is something that I can't really teach very well, and then a book can't really teach it. It's something you want to develop yourself, and hopefully that makes sense. But I only say that because that's what has really helped with my pruning work is that instinctual set of things. Yeah, and thanks for everybody for signing up.
Beautiful. Get out there and use your instinct and just start doing it with compassion and care and love and attention. Thank you, Gordon. That's really lovely. Thank you, all of you who joined us today with Gordon MacKay. Gordon, I might be asking you for a list of those tools. I'll put it on Facebook. And will you let me know any pruning workshops you have coming up? You have something coming up in Qualicum soon. Can you tell us about that? And then if you keep me in the loop with anything else that you're doing, I'll post it on our Gabbing About Gardening Facebook page for everyone.
Yeah, well, I just actually got an email from the Qualicum Club this morning because we're doing a workshop on Saturday outside, and I was just asking them about any spaces left, but they said that it was because of the insurance side of things, that it's only for members, I guess, of the club. So if you're a member, or if you want to join, then it'd be worth contacting them. But other than that, though, there is, now that we're hoping to get into in-person stuff, as Lou knows, I've done workshops at Quadra, in-person stuff. So if you have a garden club that you have a member who's willing to host a workshop, then I'd be happy to do that either in the summer or in the winter. because I've done various workshops throughout the island on that in-person ones. And the ones in person, it makes a lot more sense to people to be there and see the cuts. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we'll remain hopeful that we'll be able to gather again and keep gathering again. For now, please join us on our regular Zoom gatherings. I'll let everybody know when the next one is. We are taking the summer off, so it won't be until September. And in the meantime, check out the Gabbing About Gardening Facebook page, where you can see what's going on in your area. And I'll post some of this information from Gordon. And Gordon, we will have this recording in the next couple of days, and I'll send you a copy of it as well for your files to share around with people.
Great, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Now get outside and get dirty. Have a wonderful evening. Many blessings. Start your pruning. We'll see you next time. Thank you again, Gordon. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.